Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
It began innocuously enough, with the clink of cutlery and the polite murmur of family conversation, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my posture formal though my heart raced, as Tessa's relatives leaned into their plates of dry roast and overdressed greens. The scent of barely seasoned meat mingled with the heavy aroma of red wine, and everywhere I looked, I saw expectation. Tessa's brother Logan cleared his throat theatrically, drawing the room's attention like a ringmaster commanding his audience. He stabbed at his fork, scooped a meager portion of roast beef, and smirked at me. "That dumb collar thing you built?" he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Nobody's gonna buy it. You really think people care about their dog's mood?" Laughter ricocheted around the table, a chorus of derision led by Logan's booming baritone. My cheeks warmed as I met Tessa's eyes, searching for a flicker of support, but found only forced amusement and a rehearsed smile. Her lips curled into a polite laugh, the kind that veils discomfort with obligation. Even her mother, Opal, raised her glass in mock approval while her lips twitched as though she were about to say something kind, then swallowed it back down. My throat felt tight, but I swallowed before responding. I sipped my water slowly, savoring the cool clarity against the heat of their scorn. Because in that moment, I carried a secret they could never imagine. Logan leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming triumphantly, as if he had slayed a dragon. He glanced at our cousin May, who raised an eyebrow in half-hearted agreement. "At least he's trying," she said, her tone too polite to conceal her scorn. The room hummed with whispered endorsements of Logan's verdict, and I felt the weight of their disbelief settle onto my shoulders like a burlap sack. They saw a man tinkering with wires in his garage, wasting his potential on a novelty pet gadget. They didn't see the late nights hunched over soldering irons, the mountains of code that poured from my laptop when the house was silent, the prototype collars I had strapped onto every dog I knew until the sensors and algorithms sang in harmony. They didn't know that I had spent the last 4 years chasing a vision born from heartbreak, that each data point I collected from stray and sheltered animals had chipped away at the impossible, bringing me ever closer to saving lives. They didn't know that the collar I built wasn't a trinket, it was a lifeline. A week ago, I'd stood in Google's gleaming conference room, nervously adjusting my tie and watching their pet health division's directors examine my presentation. I'd shown them the predictive health curves, the real-time alerts, the testimonials from veteran veterinarians whose diagnoses had been preempted by my device's subtle readings. I'd held my breath while they consulted behind closed doors, and then, at last, I'd exhaled when they offered $5.5 billion. I'd walked out with a handshake and a contract in hand, a deal that transformed every skeptic's doubt into astonished headlines. But tonight, it was just roast and wine and Logan's laughter. I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered the day we lost Max. Our family dog, the one who had curled at my feet whenever I coded deep into the night, had stopped eating and lost weight so swiftly that by the time my parents realized the gravity of his condition, the vet's diagnosis of pancreatic cancer had come as a death sentence. I had stood in that sterile exam room, the antiseptic smell cutting through my shock, as Max lay on the table, eyes luminous with trust even as his body betrayed him. And I had vowed then, between sobs, that no other pet would slip away while their human watched helplessly. That promise had carried me through every setback, every ridicule, every doubt, including this very dinner. I opened my eyes, leveled my gaze on Logan, and allowed the faintest curve of a smile to play on my lips. No words passed my throat, none were needed. I let the silence stretch thickly between us, a counterpoint to his mockery. I glanced down at the folded contract peeking from my inner jacket pocket, the weight of it pressed against my chest. They might see only a man in hoodies and grease-stained fingers, but tomorrow, they would see something else. The notification chime in my pocket would wake me at dawn, then cascade through every news outlet. Google acquires PawPrint AI for $5.5 billion. Meet the quiet genius saving pets' lives. More wine? Opal asked, her tone obliging. I shook my head and took another sip of water. I let the conversation drift to safe topics, May's new job, Tessa's upcoming charity gala, while Logan's voice softened to polite inquiry. I maintained the pretense of the evening, nodding and smiling, while my mind raced with the anticipated reactions. Would Logan's laughter turn to astonishment? Would Tessa look at me with pride instead of amusement? Would her mother, the woman who had once tut-tutated about my soldering fumes, ask how she could invest? I rose from the table before the main course arrived, a practiced gesture of fatigue. I'm going to step outside for a moment, I said softly. No one protested. They believed I needed fresh air after dinner. Once I was on the terrace, the chilly night air bit at my cheeks, and I closed my eyes, breathing deeply of the garden's faint jasmine. Beneath the hum of polite dinner chatter, a current of exhilaration pulsed through me. Tomorrow, at first light, I would flip the script. Tonight, I played the underdog. Tomorrow, I became the victor. I checked my watch. 6 hours until sunrise. 6 hours until the world learned what I already knew. 6 hours until every doubt and every cruel joke dissolved in the glow of undeniable success. I straightened my jacket, touched the contract in my pocket to remind myself it was real, and walked back inside. The laughter resumed the moment I re-entered the dining room, but in my mind, I was already elsewhere, on the cusp of proving that the quietest triumphs often speak loudest of all. For years ago, I stood in a glass-walled office on Wall Street, surrounded by colleagues in tailored suits who tapped impatiently on their phones while I reviewed another spreadsheet. I just turned in my resignation, and the air felt impossibly thin, as though the world might collapse the moment my hand left the desk. I pressed send on the email that ended my lucrative finance career, one I had cultivated with late nights and delicate risk calculations, because grief had reshaped my priorities. Max, our golden retriever, had been my constant companion since my childhood, sensing my mood before I could name it. When he stopped eating, I'd blamed old age. By the time the vet diagnosed pancreatic cancer, it was too late. I spent his final days at his side, stroking his fur and promising that I would save other pets from the same fate. That promise propelled me out of corporate comfort and toward a perilous, exhilarating unknown. I moved into a cramped 2-car garage that doubled as my makeshift laboratory. The concrete floor was scuffed from years of parking my ancient Corolla, but now it was littered with circuit boards, temperature sensors, and half-finished collars draped over folding chairs. I scrawled notes on every surface: the wall, the whiteboard, packing boxes, annotating behaviors I observed in rescue dogs, how their tails hung low when they were fatigued, how subtle shifts in their gait preceded illness, how minute changes in body temperature could signal distress. I sketched an AI-driven smart collar on a battered legal pad, a discrete band embedded with sensors to track posture, movement, and heat, feeding data into machine learning algorithms that could detect anomalies long before symptoms surfaced. Critics called me reckless, a geek chasing a pipe dream. But every time I doubted myself, I felt Max's damp nose against my hand in my memory, urging me on. Late one night, when I was on the verge of tearing the whole project apart, I called Idris, my college friend and an engineer whose mind moved as fast as mine. In the glow of my laptop, I walked him through my prototype's architecture, the Bluetooth modules transmitting data to a central hub, the neural networks classifying normal versus aberrant behavior, the cloud infrastructure that stored terabytes of anonymized pet health data. He listened, his voice low with excitement, and offered to help. Within weeks, he had rigged up a custom PCB to replace my clumsy breadboard setup, rewrote the firmware for efficiency, and optimized the data pipeline so alerts arrived within seconds of a flagged event. With Idris on board, the collar evolved from a rough proof of concept into a robust device that fit snugly on dogs of all sizes, their comfort paramount in every iteration. Our first field test felt like stepping off a cliff. We fostered a litter of stray pups through a local shelter, fitting each one with our collar and comparing their behavior against veterinarians' observations. I spent hours watching live feeds, translating every erratic shuffle into data points and mapping them against the vet's daily check-ins. When Luna, a trembling dachshund, exhibited extended periods of lethargy and microspasms in her steps, our system flagged an alert. The shelter staff rushed her to an ultrasound, which revealed an early-stage infection that would have gone unnoticed for days. Treating her early saved her life, and in that moment, I understood the gravity of what we were building. Despite those victories, financial strain gnawed at me. I lived on meager savings, surviving on instant noodles and cold showers to funnel every penny into inventory and server costs. Tessa, supportive yet anxious, bore the weight of my choice in her tired eyes. Her family resented the change. He used to wear suits, Opal whispered to Tessa at a holiday gathering. Now he wears hoodies and smells like soldering fumes. Even Tessa would ask, in quieter moments, whether I was chasing fantasy or ignoring our future. Each remark cut deeper than any code error. Still, I pressed on, reassured by every test validation and each rescued animal whose story arrived in my inbox. I framed letters from grateful pet owners and photos of wagging tails on the walls of my tiny apartment, reminders that I wasn't alone. With proof of concept secured, I began pitching investors. I refined my presentations until the narrative flowed like a story rather than a sales pitch. How a grieving pet owner had transformed loss into a mission. How AI could democratize veterinary insights. How preventative care could save billions in both medical costs and emotional anguish. Some doors closed. Others swung wide when I mentioned our collaboration with shelters and the preliminary data showing a 30% reduction in emergency interventions. The pivotal moment came when a venture partner introduced me to Google's pet health division. I flew to Mountain View, heart pounding, and stood before their panel of directors when they granted us a term sheet for $5 billion, offering resources to scale globally. I felt the culmination of every sleepless night and every skeptic's doubt melt away. Now, as I prepare to join Google's innovation team, I carry that garage-born spirit with me. The smart collar that began as duct-tape sensors and patched-together code has grown into a beacon of hope for pet parents everywhere. And though I'm stepping into boardrooms and polished conference tables, I'll never forget where the journey started. With a broken heart, a dog's last breath, and a promise that technology could bring us closer to those we love. Chapter 2 closes not on an ending, but on a threshold, from grief to invention, from solitary tinkering to world-changing impact. The circuit and the collar remain at the core of every future endeavor, reminders that innovation thrives when passion and purpose collide. I still remember the first time I slid behind the wheel of that rusty old Corolla, its faded orange paint chipped at the edges, and its engine coughed spitting like an arthritic old man. The seats sagged in the middle, and the passenger door didn't quite latch, but it got me where I needed to go, and that was exactly the point. Every dollar I saved by nursing that relic kept my dream alive. While my former colleagues in the finance world commuted in sleek sedans, I counted pennies to fund server hosting fees and sensor parts. The Corolla smelled of oil and stale air freshener, but whenever I squeezed through traffic, I felt a fierce satisfaction. This car was emblematic of the life I'd chosen. Humble, sometimes uncomfortable, yet threaded through with purpose. I didn't need luxury, I needed freedom. And freedom meant channeling every resource into PawPrint AI, the company that began as a solitary garage experiment and had grown, against all odds, into a billion-dollar enterprise on the brink of transformation. Home was a modest one-bedroom apartment above a corner grocery, the kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights in the hallway and a single window that framed the neighbor's brick wall. Inside, I stacked cardboard boxes full of prototype collars in one corner and a battered desk groaning under monitors in another. The kitchenette was too small for more than a hot plate, and I'd long since given up on microwave meals in favor of simple stir-fries I whipped up on borrowed cookware. My bed doubled as my couch, its sagging mattress held together by a quilt that bore dog hair from every animal I ever tested. I welcomed visitors only when necessary. Tessa occasionally stopped by, her concern etched into her features when she saw the scattered wires and solder marks on my fingers. "You can't live like this forever," she would say, half laughing, half pleading. Her family's disapproval hung in her silence. They saw a man trading stability for uncertainty, chasing an obsession with pet tech collars that they equated to child's play. They didn't see the code that ran the neural networks, the millions of data points that crunched every hour, or the rescue dogs whose lives depended on those precise calculations. Behind the scenes, unheralded by the outside world, the collars were already fostering miracles. We partnered with shelters across 3 states, fitting devices on dogs flagged for medical attention. Every morning, I logged into the dashboard from my rickety laptop, refreshing reports that showed spikes in agitation or dips in activity. A Baja shelter contacted me one frigid dawn to say their collars alerted them to a German shepherd whose elevated temperature and reluctance to walk marked the onset of pneumonia. A quick intervention saved her life. In Chicago, a family credited the collar's posture analysis with catching joint pain in a senior beagle before it became debilitating arthritis. Each success fueled my resolve and tightened the invisible thread connecting a grieving inventor to the very real animals benefiting from his work. I printed photos of wagging tails and heartfelt letters from relieved owners, taping them above my desk like trophies of compassion. All the while, negotiations with Google's pet health division loomed large. I conducted clandestine conference calls from the driver's seat of the Corolla, parked in empty lots at odd hours. The glare of my phone screen lit up my determined face as I presented live telemetry and trend analyses. Their analysts asked about scalability, data privacy, hardware durability. Idris joined on video, explaining the ruggedized connectors and fail-safe wireless protocols we'd engineered. We talked ROI, global rollout strategies, and integration into Google's cloud infrastructure. Each affirmation from their side tightened the knot of excitement in my chest. Yet I never let anyone see me grin. The element of surprise was my ally. Tessa knew only fragments, an impending deal, an approaching acquisition, but not the full magnitude. Logan and his ilk, who had once dismissed me as a hobbyist, still imagined me soldering dog gadgets in obscurity. They had no idea that behind my hoodies lay business plans and term sheets worth billions. When at last the offer arrived, a formal letter detailing the $5.5 billion acquisition, I sat in the Corolla under a street lamp, heart hammering. The letterhead gleamed with Google's familiar logo. I reread the terms: full integration, personal equity stake, leadership of a newly formed innovation acquisitions team. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the fine print, imagining the shift from scrappy startup to global giant. Reality settled in with a rush of disbelief. Every sleepless night, every grocery store-lit coding session, every sacrifice of comfort had led to this watershed moment. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my jacket pocket, and sat back, savoring the silence. The Corolla's engine idled, unaware that its owner was about to drive into a future few could conceive. Later that evening, I peeled back the faded garage door of my first workspace for one last look. The workbench lay silent, its tools still scattered, as though waiting for a return that would never come. I ran my hand along the edge of the table, tracing the scars of countless experiments. Then I closed the door and locked it, stepping into the night with the conviction that the best code writes itself when guided by purpose and unrelenting belief. As I climbed back into the Corolla, I felt the weight of every sneer and joke ease into a memory I would one day recount in boardrooms. For now, though, I drove toward an uncertain, brilliant dawn, knowing that even the rustiest car and the humblest beginnings can power the most extraordinary journeys. That dinner felt like a slow-motion play in which I was both the unsuspecting actor and the unwitting victim. As Logan's laughter echoed through the dining room, I kept my face composed, as though every jeer were nothing more than playful banter. I watched the candlelight dance on polished silverware, saw the wine stain spreading across the tablecloth as Tessa tilted her glass, and imagined the first headlines breaking across screens worldwide before dawn. All the while, Logan continued his performance, dissecting my so-called folly with relish. "You could have been something, man," he said, voice rich with smug satisfaction. "But hey, someone's got to build doggy Fitbits for a living." Even Tessa offered a polite chuckle, as though she were witnessing a harmless family roast rather than a mortal blow. I felt their disbelief settle around me like a suffocating cloak, yet beneath my calm exterior, anticipation crackled like electricity. In a few short hours, the world would know who I really was. After dinner, the family drifted toward the living room for desserts and small talk. I lingered at the table, lingering over a final sip of water, savoring the cold clarity. Logan rose to refill his wine glass, giving me a sideways glance that said, "Enjoying the show?" I returned his glance with a still smile and nodded subtly at my watch, an unspoken promise that the punchline was on its way. The dessert plates emerged, laden with cherry pie and creme brulee, and as Opal quipped about trying to use her granddaughter's college fund to finance her shopping habit, I allowed myself a private smile. None of them understood the magnitude of what I carried in my jacket pocket, a sealed envelope with tomorrow's proof of my vindication. Google's official press release, emblazoned with its unmistakable logo, would declare their acquisition of PawPrint AI for $5.5 billion. And with it, transform me from a tinkerer in hoodies into a pioneer whose technology saved thousands of lives. I offered to help clear the table, volunteering to carry the stack of plates to the kitchen. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the top plate, but I controlled my breathing and focused on the ordinary act of transport. Plates clacked together, forks rattled, and behind me, Logan continued to hold court, oblivious to the shifting tides beneath his feet. In the kitchen, I placed the plates in the sink, shut off the faucet, and paused. The fluorescent light above cast harsh reflections on the stainless steel, reminding me of the cold, unflinching glare of news cameras I would face at dawn. I ran my fingers along the worn countertop, recalling every late-night coding session, every failed prototype, every moment of doubt I had conquered. Here, amid chip tiles and grease spots, Pauperant AI had been born. Here, my dream had taken shape. And here, I would leave behind the echoes of mockery. I returned to the living room, where conversation had shifted to politics and golf scores. Tessa sat on the plush sofa, leaning toward her cousin May as she recounted a story about May's new job. I caught Tessa's eye for an instant, saw that flicker of shared history that still lay between us, before she looked away and laughed at May's anecdote. It stung deeper than any direct insult. It wasn't just about respect, it was about belief. I needed her to see me the way I saw myself, inventor, leader, someone whose work mattered. I needed her to believe in the vision that had sustained me when everyone else dismissed it as a hobby. In that moment, I realized this acquisition would change everything, not only in the public sphere, but in the private one as well. Would Tessa stand beside me once she understood the stakes? Would Logan respect me when he saw what I had achieved? More importantly, would I still care what they thought once the world recognized my success? I checked my phone's clock. 9:45 p.m., 10 hours until the embargo lifted. I excused myself, claiming an early night, and walked out to the balcony. The night air was cool and carried the distant sounds of traffic. I leaned against the railing and held up my phone, imagining the first alert, a push notification with the headline in bold letters, followed by a swell of retweets and shares. I pictured my friends at Pauperant, their exhausted but exhilarated faces as they discovered the news. I pictured Idris pacing in his workshop, already plotting the next phase of integration. And I pictured Logan's bewildered expression when he realized his cousin's underachiever was now a billionaire inventor. The thought made me smile, genuine and unguarded. Back inside, I found Tessa gathering her coat by the door, ready to leave. She gave me a quick hug, her cheek brushing my shoulder, and whispered, "Good night." I nodded, trying to convey more than the words aloud, but she seemed distant, her attention already shifting to a text alert she'd just received. Tessa didn't say, "I'm proud of you." She didn't ask, "Can't wait to hear more." She simply slipped into the night, leaving the house of judgment in silence. I watched her go, then turned and faced the room where plates were askew and laughter had faded to polite murmurs. For the first time that evening, I felt a pang of loneliness and then a surge of resolve. I locked the door behind me and climbed the stairs to the small apartment I shared with Tessa. My key turned with a familiar click, the empty hallway echoing with stillness. Inside, I switched on the lamp by my bedside, its warm glow illuminating the contract on the nightstand. I picked up the envelope, traced the edges, and slid it open. There it was, the headline, the terms, the proof of everything I had sacrificed. I read it twice, then tucked it into my jacket for safekeeping. Tomorrow, I would wake at dawn, brew a cup of coffee, and watch the world awaken to my story. Tonight, I would sleep knowing that revenge was not in shouting about success. Revenge was in the silent drop of a bombshell that rendered every mocking word meaningless. And as I turned off the lamp, the words echoed in my mind. This was my moment, and they would see me at last. Morning light filtered through the blinds in slanted stripes, painting my modest kitchen in golden bands as my phone erupted in a symphony of notifications. I blinked against the glare, heart hammering as I reached for the device. CNN, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, Wired, the New York Times, all emblazoned with the same banner. Google acquires Pauperant AI for $5.5 billion. Meet the quiet genius behind the tech saving pets' lives. My coffee mug trembled in my hand, its chipped rim rattling against the counter. I set it down and scrolled through the headlines, each one confirming the reality I barely dared to believe. This was no dream. This was the culmination of years spent huddled over soldering irons, of nights filled with code that refused to compile, of every skeptic's sneer fueling my determination. I stood in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by half-empty cereal boxes and a stack of unpaid bills, and felt the world shift beneath my feet. My phone vibrated again, a text from Tessa. Why didn't you tell me? The message appeared jagged against the polished headlines, raw and jagged. My chest tightened, a knot of conflicting emotions. I wanted to shout back, to tell her that I needed the moment to unfold on my own terms, that I'd been crafting this surprise for months so she could see me for who I truly was. But I knew it would come across as defensive, as if I were hiding something. So I inhaled deeply, tapped out a careful reply, something neutral, something that wouldn't betray my elation or my hurt, and set the phone aside. Instead, I sank onto the rickety stool by the countertop and watched the steam curl from my coffee. The aroma grounded me bitter, familiar, and calm. I thought of Idris back at his workshop, probably pacing the floor with excitement, already drafting the roadmap for integration with Google's cloud services. I thought of our small team at the Poprin office, who had sacrificed salary for equity, who had balanced side gigs with late nights to keep the servers running. They cheered in hushed voices when the first alerts from our callers flagged early signs of illness in shelter animals. Now, because of them, $5.5 billion would flow into our vision, magnifying its impact to a scale I had only dared to imagine. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail from Idris, excited, breathless, his words tumbling over one another. My grin widened before I even hit play. I pressed the playback button and let his voice wash over me. Bro, we did it. We actually did it. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his pride and relief settle in my chest. No, I whispered into the empty room. You did. I just steered the ship. I pressed delete on the message, knowing I'd replay it later when I needed the reminder of how far we'd come. By 9 o'clock, I forced myself to step away from the headlines. I couldn't launch Google's integration dashboard from my home office. That was for later. Instead, I washed my mug and cleared away the last of the breakfast dishes, each clink of ceramic against the sink a small anchor to reality. I dressed in something more fitting, a crisp shirt and tailored jeans, before slipping the original Google term sheet into my jacket pocket. I caught a glance of myself in the hallway mirror. Eyes bright, jaw set, hands steady. The hoodie and solder marks were gone, replaced by a meme that said, I know where I belong. When I arrived at the Popprint headquarters, the energy in the office was electric. The team had gathered around the communal table, sipping lukewarm coffee from paper cups and staring at their laptops with wide eyes. Screens displayed social media feeds overflowing with praise and surprise. I stepped into the room and felt their excitement ripple through me. Rael, my executive assistant, materialized beside me, her smile radiant. They're calling us innovators, visionaries, even heroes, she said. Look at this. People are sharing stories of how our collars saved their pets. She tapped her finger against a tablet displaying heartwarming testimonials. A Labrador rescued from heatstroke, a terrier whose collar predicted a seizure, a senior poodle whose declining mobility had been halted by early joint therapy. Each story was a testament to the device we'd poured our souls into. I stood before the team, my voice steady despite the surge of emotion. We started this company in a garage with nothing but grief and a dare to dream, I said. Today, thanks to all of you, we're part of Google, and we have the power to change millions of lives. Applause erupted, filling the small space with gratitude and camaraderie. I caught Idris's eye across the table. He raised his own coffee cup in a silent toast. I lifted mine in return, savoring the moment before we mapped out the next steps. Data migration plans, hardware scaling schedules, cross-functional workshops with Google's engineers. By midday, the press had begun to trickle into my inbox, interview requests from tech podcasts, invitations to speak at industry summits, panel slots at global conferences. I read each email, scanning schedules and planning responses like a general organizing an operation. Somewhere in there was a note from Logan. Congrats, I guess. It was terse, buried among other messages. For a moment, I considered responding with a pointed rejoinder about underestimating me, about how his mockery would taste on his own tongue. But then I remembered the kitchen silence, Tessa's pointed question, the ache of being unseen. I decided instead to let my work speak for itself. I would extend a gesture of reconciliation, an invitation to tour the new innovation lab, should he choose to accept. Whether he did or not, I would move forward without bitterness. Evening approached, and I drove the Corolla one last time toward the coastline, as I had done when I first received the acquisition offer. The ocean stretched before me, vast and unwavering. I parked near the dunes and stepped onto the sand, letting the breeze tousle my hair. In my hand, I held the Google-backed collar prototype destined for millions of pets. I placed it gently on a piece of driftwood, a symbolic tribute to the journey that had begun with small circuits and big dreams. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, and I felt a serenity I hadn't known since Max's final days. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Tessa, "I'm proud of you." 2 simple words that carried the weight of everything. I smiled, eyes misting, and typed back, "Thank you." I pocketed the device and gazed at the collar, imagining the countless animals it would help and the owners it would comfort. Tomorrow, I would step into boardrooms and press conferences, representing a vision far larger than myself. But today, I simply stood on the sand, breathing in possibility and gratitude, knowing that the deal drop was not an end but the thrilling preamble to a future we would build together. Stepping into the paw-print office that morning felt like walking into the heart of everything I had fought for. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the hum of servers down the hall, and the fluorescent lights overhead revealed a group of faces flushed with excitement. My team, engineers, data scientists, customer success reps, clustered around a long table strewn with bagels, fruit platters, and the remnants of celebratory pastries. They'd camped out overnight, waiting for me to arrive and eager to share in the moment that validated years of sacrifice. I paused in the doorway, letting their energy wash over me before I took my first step across the threshold of this new reality. Idris was the first to spot me. He waved a half-eaten croissant in greeting, eyes shining with pride. "You made it," he called, voice hoarse from shouting updates to every press outlet he could think of. I smiled, pulling off my jacket to reveal the paw-print logo tee beneath. It felt symbolic. The same shirt I designed for our earliest conferences, now worn by the company Google had just acquired. Across the room, Rael adjusted the banner reading, "Welcome to Google Innovation Acquisitions," adding a final flourish before stepping aside to let me through. She caught my eye and winked, as if sharing a private joke about how far we'd come from the garage. I approached the table, where mugs emblazoned with paw-print motif waited next to branded notebooks and pens. The team clinked their cups together in a spontaneous toast when I raised my own. In that moment, I saw the faces that had stood by me when clients balked at the price point, when investors walked away unimpressed, and when every test seemed to generate more questions than answers. They hadn't just believed in the product, they believed in the mission. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring its bitter warmth, and looked around the room as applause rippled through the group. "We're not just launching collars anymore," I began, voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "We're expanding an ecosystem that saves lives." I motioned toward Idris, who tapped his tablet to display a live map dotted with red and green markers. "Pets alerted, interventions made. Since last night," I said, "we've received reports of early diagnoses in shelters from Seattle to Miami. That means dozens more saves every hour." A cheer erupted, and someone started playing a recorded news clip on the conference room screen, a tech anchor detailing the acquisition, punctuated by images of dogs wearing our collars and my own unlikely journey from garage inventor to tech pioneer. I felt my heart swell with gratitude and purpose. After the initial celebration, I guided the team through our next steps. We'd integrate our telemetry platform into Google Cloud's pet health division, optimize our AI models with expanded GPU resources, and leverage Google's global distribution channels to place collars in every major veterinary network. I handed out assignments, and as each person leaned in with questions about timelines and deliverables, I realized that leadership meant more than making decisions. It meant listening, empowering, and sharing in both responsibility and excitement. When someone asked about cross-training sessions with Google engineers, I exchanged a look with Idris. "We'll design workshops together," I replied, "so our data scientists can collaborate directly with Google's AI experts." The room hummed with the thrill of collaboration, ambition tempered by the knowledge that our technology would serve a purpose greater than profit. Mid-morning, I slipped away to a quiet corner to return calls from partners and press. I spoke with shelter directors who asked how to order next batches of collars, and with pet health researchers eager to analyze our anonymized datasets for academic studies. Each conversation reinforced that paw-print AI had transcended its humble beginnings. It was now a beacon of innovation in animal welfare. When my phone buzzed with a notification that our acquisition announcement had trended globally, I inhaled deeply, smiled, and slipped the device back into my pocket. There would be time later to absorb every detail of this milestone. For now, I refocused on the faces around me. People who trusted me with their careers, their aspirations, and their belief in a shared vision. As lunchtime approached, I joined the team for sandwiches and wraps, sitting at the head of the table where I had once delivered a nervous pitch to skeptical investors. Now, I listened as colleagues shared ideas for expanding into wearable health trackers for cats, small mammals, even horses. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself sketching rough flowcharts on a napkin, planning phases of research and design. When we finished eating, we headed out onto the rooftop terrace for a brief break. The city skyline stretched in every direction, a reminder that we were no longer confined to one garage, one apartment, one idea. We were part of something vast. I turned to face the group, wind ruffling my hair, and raised my voice slightly so everyone could hear. "This office built the future," I said, voice firm with conviction. "And now, with Google behind us, we'll build it at scale, saving lives, advancing pet health, and proving that technology born of compassion can change the world." They cheered again, and I felt a profound sense of purpose settle in my bones. My journey from underdog to industry leader had reached a pivotal chapter, but the story was far from over. Together, we would write the next pages, and this time, the world would be ready to read. I slid behind the wheel of my Corolla before sunrise, the engine's familiar rattles greeting me like an old friend. The coastline stretched ahead, a ribbon of gray sand meeting the pale glow of dawn, and I felt the weight of unspoken possibilities resting on my shoulders. The house I'd purchased in secret stood perched atop a low bluff, its white siding and slate roof catching the first pink tendrils of morning light. Oceanfront, I'd whispered to myself as I signed the papers, picturing Tessa's breath catching at the view, her eyes widening in delight when I revealed what I'd been working toward in silence. Now, as I navigated the winding road toward the property, doubt gnawed at me. What if that moment never came? What if the gulf between us proved too vast to bridge, even in such a perfect setting? When I reached the driveway, dew clung to the eucalyptus leaves, and gulls wheeled overhead, their calls echoing against the hush of the dawn. I parked and stepped out, the cold air brushing against my face like a challenge. In my hand, I carried the small black key fob, my key to a future I'd forged through grit, code, and conviction. I ran my finger over the embossed logo of the development firm, imagining the sale price that had lurked behind every negotiation, every saved penny, every refusal to relent when obstacles loomed. I walked up the flagstone path, each step measured, savoring the moment before turning the fob and hearing the lock click open. Inside, the house was flooded with soft light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the horizon in every room, the living area's hardwood floors gleaming under the gentle rays. A sleek, modern kitchen gleamed to my right, its marble countertops pristine, as though waiting for a celebratory breakfast. I closed the front door behind me and slid my jacket off, setting the key fob on the countertop next to an envelope addressed to Tessa. Inside lay the deed, a handwritten note, and a hotel gift certificate for a weekend getaway, my carefully orchestrated reveal. I ran my hand along the back of the couch, the linen fabric cool beneath my fingertips. This house represented the culmination of every risk I'd taken, leaving finance for a fading color prototype, living on instant noodles while wiring sensors in a garage, enduring Logan's jibes and Opal's disapproving glances. I'd sacrificed sleep and stability, watched relationships fray under the strain of my obsession, all in pursuit of something no one else could see. Yet here it was in brick and timber, proof that my convictions could yield more than skepticism. Still, as I moved through the open-plan rooms, I couldn't shake the hollow thrum in my chest. The house felt too quiet, as if it already mourned Tessa's absent presence. I placed the envelope on the marble island and wandered to the master bedroom. The king-sized bed beckoned, its plush duvet folded back neatly. On the bedside table, I had arranged a photograph of Max, the dog who had started it all, next to a framed letter from a grateful pet owner. I paused, remembering how Tessa had comforted me when Max fell ill, her hand warm on my back as I vowed to save other animals. She had believed in the mission once, when it was still an embryo of hope. Somewhere along the way, her faith had faltered, replaced by practical worries and distant smiles. I let out a slow breath and crossed to the sliding glass doors leading to the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly, waves tumbling in rhythmic crescendos. I pictured us here together, coffee mugs in hand, sharing sunrise reflections and dreams. I pictured her laughter, bright as sea spray, chasing away any lingering shadows of doubt. But that was the risk of love and ambition entwined. You build dreams not just for yourself, but for others to inhabit alongside you. And if they don't choose to join, you must decide whether to leave the doors open or retreat into solitude. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an alert from the team dashboard showing that shelters in New Zealand had begun receiving the first Google-powered collars. I smiled, pride unfurling like the sun's rays across the horizon. The long game was paying off in ways I had only dreamed. Yet when I checked my messages, I found no query from Tessa asking where I was or what I was doing. Instead, there was a terse text from Logan. Heard about the house. Congrats. His words felt hollow, but at least they suggested I had not entirely slipped from his awareness. I pocketed the phone and returned my gaze to the sea, letting its vastness remind me of perspective. Success was measured not just by boardroom victories or beachfront properties, but by the connections you forged along the way. I had built an empire from empathy and electronics. What lay ahead was building something that endured the test of intimacy and trust. Soft footsteps alerted me to a presence behind. I turned to see Rael standing in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her. "I came to make sure you were okay," she said gently. "Team's checking in, wondering if you need anything." Her concern warmed me. "I'm good," I replied, though my voice felt unsteady. "Just taking it all in." She offered a nod and a small smile, then shifted her gaze to the ocean. "I think she'll love it," Rael said softly. "If she sees this, she'll know how much you believe in her." The words struck a chord. I realized then that I had built this house as a monument to my own achievements, but the true gift would be seeing it through her eyes. Her acceptance turning steel and stone into a shared sanctuary. I crossed the room and picked up the envelope from the counter. The key fob felt heavy in my hand again, but not with doubt this time, only with hope. I imagined greeting Tessa at the threshold, her footsteps echoing in the foyer, her voice surprised and soft as she read the note I had written. A confession of dreams and apologies for not letting her in sooner. I would tell her then what I had always known. That success without companionship was an empty triumph, and that her faith in me mattered more than any acquisition. The sky had turned from pink to gold, and I took one last look at the waves before stepping back inside. The garage, the apartment, the boardrooms, they were milestones on my journey, but this house was the crossroads. It stood waiting not just for my arrival, but for hers. I inhaled deeply, adjusted the envelope beneath my arm, and turned toward the door, resolved to play the long game not only in business, but in love. The lobby lights hummed above us as Logan waited by the bank of elevators, shoulders hunched and eyes cast downward. I'd arrived minutes earlier, expecting the corporate calm of my apartment building, not this confrontation. He looked up when I emerged from the foyer and hesitated, the silence between us heavier than any words could be. For a moment, I thought he might turn and walk away, but he took a step forward, voice shaking. "I screwed up," he said. "I didn't know, man. I thought you were just—" "I don't know." His confession felt oddly small against the backdrop of my recent triumph, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, headlines hailing me as a visionary. Yet here in this sterile, tiled lobby, I wasn't the self-made billionaire. I was just his brother-in-law, the one he'd mocked at family dinners, the one who had silently outpaced him. I studied his face, saw the genuine regret etched in the lines around his eyes. The elevator door slid open with a soft ping. We stepped inside. I pressed the button for my floor and leaned against the mirrored wall, watching Logan's reflection approach. "You thought I was wasting my time?" I said quietly, as though we were still back at that roast dinner. My tone wasn't accusatory, but measured, someone who understood betrayal's sting. His shoulders sagged. "I did. I thought you were playing with toys." His laugh trembled, lacking its usual swagger. "I'm sorry." The elevator climbed, and the hum of machinery filled the brief gap. I held his gaze until the display read 16, one floor from my apartment. "I needed to believe in something," I told him, voice steadying. "And I needed you to believe in me, too." The words felt vulnerable, an admission I'd rehearsed alone in my head countless times. Logan's jaw tightened, and I saw the weight of his realization that my success wasn't a fluke, but the product of relentless faith and labor. He squared his shoulders. "So what now?" he asked. His question echoed in the small metal box, mingling with the soft ding of passing floors. I considered the power balance between us, remembered the boardroom pitches, the negotiation tables, the way I'd held Google's attention with nothing more than conviction. I could remind him of every mocking word, could flaunt my equity stake and new title. But vindictiveness felt small now. I wanted something more enduring than revenge. I turned away from the mirror and looked him in the eye. "Now," I said, "you watch." I let the word linger, a promise of future triumphs yet to come. "This is just chapter 1. Logan blinked, absorbing the scope of what I implied, that my journey was far from over, that he would bear witness to the unfolding of my vision. Before he could respond, the elevator dinged on my floor. I stepped forward and pressed open, giving him room. He hesitated in the doorway, then stepped out, gaze locked on me. "I'll be watching," he promised. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow, an acknowledgement that my work now commanded respect and attention. I watched him retreat down the hallway, an echo of our fractured relationship stitched back together by the gravity of shared history and mutual understanding. Inside my apartment, the air felt charged. I closed the door and exhaled, leaning against its smooth surface. The hallway lamp cast a warm glow through the peephole, reminding me of the long night spent coding under dim light. The collar I'd built in that garage had saved lives. The company I'd grown had transformed industries. But this moment marked a different milestone, reconciliation born of recognition. I walked to the window overlooking the city, lights twinkling like constellations in a boundless sky. I thought of all that lay ahead, integrations to oversee, product lines to expand, pet health platforms to refine. But I also thought of Logan, once a skeptic, now an ally in quiet solidarity. My phone buzzed with messages from the team, notifications of successful deployments and incoming press. All victories in their own right. Yet amidst the triumphs, I felt a deeper satisfaction, the restoration of a bond I'd nearly lost to doubt and derision. I tapped the screen and sent Logan a simple text, "Thanks for believing." I watched as the 3 little dots appeared, then vanished, and moments later, his reply, "Proud of you." The words glowed on the display, more valuable than any headline. I tucked the phone into my pocket, heart lighter than it had been in years. In the silence of my apartment, I recognized that success isn't just about changing the world. It's about bringing the people who matter along for the journey. And in that realization, I found a victory greater than any acquisition. I stepped into the sleek glass lobby of Logan's firm feeling a shift in gravity, as though I'd crossed an invisible line from family underdog to industry equal. The polished marble floors and chrome accents gleamed under recessed lighting, a world away from the sawdust-stained countertops of my garage lab. Logan emerged from a side office, dressed in a tailored suit that might have once impressed me. Now, I saw beyond the fabric to the man who had dismissed my vision as frivolous. His posture stiffened when our eyes met, and I offered a nod of acknowledgement rather than triumph. Today, I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to do business. The boardroom door slid open, revealing a long walnut table ringed by sharp-suited associates and eager analysts. Logan rose from his seat at the head, extending a hand that I took firmly. The room's hush was punctuated only by the soft whir of projectors and the rustle of paper. He motioned toward the screen behind him, where his team's pitch deck glowed in crisp resolution. A wearable health tracker startup that promised to revolutionize human fitness routines with real-time biometric feedback. The concept sounded familiar: monitor metrics, predict anomalies, coach behavior, but the execution, by his own slides, suffered from bandwidth bottlenecks and shallow data sets. Logan cleared his throat and began the presentation. He spoke smoothly of heart rate variability algorithms and proprietary sleep cycle analysis. His colleagues chimed in with charts showing modest user growth and tentative revenue streams. I listened, nodding when appropriate, but my mind cataloged every discrepancy: declining monthly retention, customer complaints about inaccurate readings, server downtimes during peak hours. When Logan paused for questions, I leaned forward, pen poised over a clean notepad. "You project a 35% churn rate improvement after your next software update, but your beta testers still experienced a 15% error margin on heart rate readings. How do you plan to reconcile user trust with these technical shortcomings?" My tone was neutral, analytical, a partner's critique rather than a rival's rebuke. Logan's jaw clenched as he gestured to the next slide, which documented planned firmware refinements. "We're addressing sensor calibration and implementing machine learning corrections," he replied, voice tight. I clicked my pen, considering. Firmware patches can only do so much if the hardware itself has inconsistencies. "Have you evaluated upgrading your sensor modules or migrating data processing to edge computing to reduce latency? Cloud-only solutions risk data transfer delays and compromised user experience." His eyes flickered to his team, whose confident expressions faltered. One associate swallowed and began to outline additional R&D budgets. I shook my head. "Investment is crucial, but you'll need strategic partnerships to offset costs. That's where Google Cloud's resources come in." I tapped the table for emphasis. "With our infrastructure, you can deploy auto-scaling pipelines that guarantee sub-second analytics and leverage AI accelerators for on-device inference. You won't just patch errors. You'll architect a system resilient enough to support 10 million concurrent users." The words hung in the air, bridging my past triumph with their present challenges. Logan took a breath. I was meeting mine with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "If Google backs us, I'd welcome that collaboration," he said quietly, the vulnerability in his voice more powerful than any sales pitch. I smiled and extended my hand again. "Good. Because I believe in excellence, not mediocrity. You showed me the value of high standards when you challenged my early prototypes. Now, I'm here to help you raise yours." The room exhaled as colleagues exchanged relieved glances, recognizing that this wasn't an adversarial takeover, but a genuine opportunity to transform an ailing project into a market leader. We spent the next hour mapping out an integration plan. Migrating their data architecture to Google Cloud Pub/Sub for real-time ingestion, refactoring microservices into containerized workflows on Kubernetes, integrating machine learning APIs for predictive analytics, and setting up cross-functional workshops between their engineers and Google's AI specialists. Each suggestion was met with thoughtful questions, as Logan's team probed practical details and timelines. I responded with the confidence of someone who had steered a billion-dollar acquisition from concept to completion. Before we adjourned, Logan rose again, his demeanor transformed. The polished veneer of boardroom bravado had given way to genuine collaboration. He approached me as I packed my notepad into my briefcase. "Thank you," he said, voice earnest. "I know this relationship started with rivalry, but I'm grateful for your guidance." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're partners now," I replied. "We'll build something remarkable together." As I crossed the lobby to leave, I glanced back to see Logan standing by the table, animatedly discussing implementation schedules with his team. The corridor's reflective surfaces captured my image walking away, a man once mocked, now respected, not just for his success, but for his willingness to lift others as he rose. Outside, the morning sun bathed the city in promise, and I walked toward the next horizon, confident that the boardroom switch marked not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter defined by collaboration, innovation, and mutual respect. I stood in the center of my new office, the late afternoon sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting long, warm slats of light across the polished hardwood floor. In my hand, I held Mia's old collar. Faded orange fabric, a silver nameplate tarnished around the edges, and I carried it to a simple wooden stand I'd placed on a side table. I slipped the collar over the prongs, its familiar weight settling in a way that felt both reverent and hopeful. This unassuming piece of fabric had sparked everything: the initial blueprint on a coffee-stained napkin, the first clumsy solder joints in my garage, the countless nights when I'd wondered if grief could ever fuel innovation. Now, it sat encasing the gleaming new pawprint AI chip, symbolizing the bridge between past and future that I had spent years building. As I turned to admire the display, the door opened quietly, and Tessa slipped inside, her expression tentative. She paused at the threshold, as though weighing her next words. The hush of the room felt charged, every second stretching taut with unspoken memories. I didn't look at her immediately. Instead, I studied a wall covered in letters from pet owners whose lives had been transformed by our collars. Handwritten thank you notes spilled across the surface, stories of early detections of cancer, of palliative care guided by real-time alerts, of families reunited with pets once thought lost. I traced a line of text in one letter that read, "Your invention gave Baxter his last Christmas." My throat tightened, and finally I turned to face Tessa, offering a small, steady smile. She stepped forward, heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. In her hand, she held a folded piece of paper, her own letter. I realized. I didn't know, she whispered, voice catching. I didn't know how much it mattered. Her eyes flicked from the wall of letters to the collar on its stand, reverence mingling with regret. I crossed the room slowly, the echo of my shoes a quiet metronome to the gravity of the moment. I took the letter from her hand and unfolded it. A simple apology, lines of ink confessing she'd judged too soon and asking how she could make things right. I tucked the note into my pocket and reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I wasn't waiting for your apology, I said softly, the words carrying more truth than I had ever spoken. I was waiting to see if you saw me. If you ever really saw what I was building and why. Tessa's pulse fluttered against my palm. She looked down, swallowing, before meeting my gaze. I thought I did, she said, voice raw. But I thought it was just another hobby, something you'd get bored of, like always. Her confession stung, but I squeezed her hand gently. This was never a hobby, I replied. It was our promise to every pet who couldn't speak for itself. I guided her to the stand, and we stood side by side, both of us studying the collar as though we were seeing it for the first time. Outside, the office corridor hummed with the distant buzz of conversation, reminders that beyond these walls lay a world forever changed by our work. But here, in this quiet sanctum, the only thing that mattered was what stood between us. A symbol of loss transformed into hope, a piece of fabric upgraded by technology that carried the power to save lives. Tessa pressed her forehead to my shoulder. I'm proud of you, she murmured, as if the words themselves were a revelation. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her acknowledgement settle in my chest like a homecoming. We stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon and the office lights cast elongated shadows across the floor. When we finally pulled away, I placed my hand over Tessa's on the collar stand, both of us tracing the ridges of the fabric. You saw me, I said, voice soft but certain, and it makes all the difference. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, and leaned into me. I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the warmth of her trust anchoring me more firmly than any boardroom victory. Later, after Tessa left, I lingered alone in the office. I powered on my workbench lights, surveying the half-assembled collars and scattered tools that awaited my attention. The prototype for the next generation sat in a plastic bin, waiting for firmware updates and fresh rounds of testing. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of solder and fresh plastic mingle with the quiet hum of the office. The world would soon see headlines about our acquisition, about how Google's resources and our team's dedication were propelling pet health into a new era. But tonight, as I polished the stand and secured Mia's collar in place, I understood that the greatest successes were the ones that spoke softly through everyday moments of recognition and partnership. Revenge, I realized, wasn't always a thunderous roar. Sometimes, the best kind of triumph was the gentle click of two people finding common ground, the silent acknowledgement that belief and understanding could transform loss into purpose. The collar before me embodied that truth. I switched off the lights, leaving a single desk lamp to cast a halo around the display. Then I walked out, locking the door behind me and stepping into the night with the quiet assurance that our work and our connection would continue to grow, powered by empathy, innovation, and a promise that no voice, no matter how small, would ever go unheard again.